All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm David DeLallo of GAI Insights, and this is our daily Gen AI briefing. And we will be going through many articles today. We're going to try to motor through, but lots of news. It's very interesting. We'll be talking about the chip situation. Chips, are like the new currency of the world, right? We will be talking about the ChatGPT incident the other night. We will talk about some moves in China, lots of stuff. So we are going to just dive right in today so that we could get it through everything for you. So there we go. All right, Ankaj, kick us off.
Yeah, thanks, David. So the first one for today that we have is from Google. So Google has launched two new open LLMs called Gamma 2B and Gamma 7B. And the interesting thing being that Google is trying to get people to run these on their TPUs.
All right, Amanda.
Yeah, so on this, I feel like this particular article is more an announcement, so I'm more on the optional camp. But I mean, again, for an executive, if you want to keep up with every single model literally that's being launched, that and I dug in a couple little other articles about it. And so one thing they were trying to say in some of the spin on it was responsible AI development. They're using different buzz terms and words as they're launching them. But another thing, just to pull out of the article, though, is that they're saying it's open versus open source. So again, that could be something for the executive, but I'm more on optional for this one.
All right. Anybody else? Adam, I know you looked up the performance of this to see how it's moving up the leaderboard. What did you find?
Yeah, so in the article, they say that the benchmarks will be available later today on Hugging Face, and they are. So I found the closest comparable 7 billion models from Facebook and Mistral, and it on average actually outperforms both of them. I mean, it's a slightly newer model, so you would expect that, but Mistral and Google are basically about at the same pace, and Meta's a fair clip behind, which I found interesting. Generally, though, I think I would agree, though, with Amanda that this is optional news.
Agreed. So Barney,
we will move right past it then, so that we have much more interesting things to discuss. I do want to understand. I didn't understand exactly what the difference was between how they're releasing this one and like typical open source.
Well, the models that have been released, there are very few that are truly open source. When you think, because here's the thing, when you start talking about these AI systems and machine learning systems, there are more than just the code. There's the code, there's the parameters or the weights, if you want to call them that, and there's the data that they're trained on. So there's really three buckets of stuff. Very few people have released all three. And so open source, most people would consider you've released everything, the code, the weights, and the data you trained on. This model, they release the weights, but they put restrictions, and there's also restrictions on use. So that's another thing about open source. There are many models of licensing. So they put restrictions on use, and they did not release the data I believe it was trained on or the actual software code.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And last time we saw that was Cohere, right, with their multi-language model a week or so ago, that they did release everything, which was cool. All right, so we will mark this as optional, and we will move on to the next one.
Okay, so the next one is from marketing and branding. So there's a new startup in play called First Hand, and they are using AI agents to help marketers engage with their clients better.
Yeah, I took this one since I'm our marketing person. I found this fascinating. For the AI leader, I don't know if I would call it important, but for every company in general that advertises online, to me, it's like essential. Well, we'll say important for now until we actually see the product come out. But what this is saying, if I understand it correctly, is now instead of having, a pop-up ad on a page, you can literally have almost, I'd call it a pop-up agent from a company. So let's say you're reading a news story and it's about, I don't know, the interest rates going up or the mortgage rates going up. There might be an agent in there from Wells Fargo that you can click on and start interacting with immediately about mortgage rates. And if you want one, you can discuss it with them. So it's literally like a very interactive ad where you would be communicating with the brand. I think that's just a really awesome use case. And so I'm blown away and I want people to read this, but like, I don't know if I could justify it for our particular audience. I don't know what anybody else thought.
I think you've got to rate this important because, I mean, you can say, again, if you have no online presence and no online media purchases, okay, it's optional. But basically, there are very few cases where that's true. And I say important as opposed to essential only because they haven't done it yet, right? So this is more a strategy, but if this strategy works, this will be a revolution because this is, you know, advertisers enjoy online targeting and things, but at the end of the day, they're completely beholden to the media platforms' algorithms. And what this is saying is we will circumvent the media platform's algorithms. If that is true, that is a revolution.
Yeah.
And they also say they manage content rights.
Yeah,
another big deal. So there's a big if here, but is it a canary in a coal mine or is it just a dream? It's probably worth a read. It's not that long and it's probably worth tracking.
Yeah. Adam, were you going to jump in?
I was just going to push back and say they literally announced a seed round today. Like there will be more news and we could rate it important then. I would say this is optional at this point. There's nothing for them to be done with it.
Anybody else? No other thought? Do you all think it's optional? Amanda, Tanya, are you feeling important?
Well, I think if we go by how we've rated things in the past, if the product is not out there yet, and this is just a, hey, look what's coming up, you know, we usually say it's an optional.
Yeah, I think as far as like technology, the thing that's coming into my mind is like when we're watching TV, right? And then they pop up the QR codes and this and that. So that's kind of the vibes I'm getting. So I don't know if I'd say this is like a breakthrough. I've never seen them. You know what I mean? It gives me those vibes. So that's why even on the tech itself, I understand this is a different scenario here, but so for me, I guess optional as well.
I can go with optional. Everybody's made good points that there will be more on this before it becomes a revolution.
All right. In our newsletter, I'm going to say optional, but and say, put it on your radar. Okay, let's move to the next one.
Okay, the next one is from Microsoft and Intel. So there was news previously that Microsoft will be designing its own chip, and now seems like it has engaged Intel to manufacture those chips for Microsoft.
Yeah, Tanya, what do you think about this?
Yeah, this was everywhere, right? I mean, online. I'm driving yesterday. You know, it's on the radio, like a big announcement, I guess, on this. So we know that whole chip industry, right? It's all Nvidia. So to have Intel kind of come in there and announce that now Microsoft is going to be working with them, you know, was a huge thing for them. So, but through this article, right, I learned a couple of things. One is, you know, Intel is now, I guess for a few years, is in this business of, hey, we don't just manufacture our own chips, but we'll work with you as you design your own, and you can leverage our manufacturing facilities, our supply chain, you know, processes, and we'll help you get your chips into the market. So it sounds like Microsoft has, you know, signed up the deal with them. I think it said $15 billion is what they're estimating it will be over the years. So a great win for Intel. But if I'm not incorrect, I don't think that the stock went up for Intel. If anything, I think it went down. So, which I found amusing. But how did I rate it? You know, I said important just because literally, like, it was on the radio. It was on Bloomberg, CNBC, the closing bell. It was online when I saw it last night, you know, so I rate it important. I think people need to know about this.
Any other thoughts? Any disagreements?
The only thing I would push back on is just because of the partnership factor. But again, for some, that goes important or essential in some cases because they love to see big partnerships. But I agree with Tanya that if there's going to be some competition out here, I think that proves to be interesting. So I could go important on this one.
All right. We will go important. I think we lost Tim for a minute, but I think we're not to his article yet. So we will just stay on chips for a moment because it seems like we just couldn't address this like ridiculous quarter that Nvidia announced. I mean, can you imagine $22 billion per quarter being generated? And I had to look up, I was like, Nvidia doesn't have a lot of employees that, as I think about it, and I looked it up, and they are still only around like 20,000 employees generating this level of revenue. Can you imagine the bonuses that people are getting over there? I mean, I might need to look for a job at Nvidia. So one thing I thought was interesting in the article, and I haven't listened to the earnings call, but I'm going to. Were like the particular industries that they called out. So, they reiterated what we know, which is, half of like their business is basically coming from the big cloud providers. But then they called out financial services. What were the other industries? Auto and one other.
Healthcare and automotive. Those were the big three and have been for a while.
Yeah. So, it's just reiterating just how things are changing, and just AI is just becoming like I feel like the platform for everything. And Nvidia, everyone thinks at some point they're going to start to fall down because obviously competition is going to creep in, but it's hard to see it happening quickly or anytime soon with these results.
Agreed.
So
it's astonishing. And as we were talking before, it doesn't say that it will never happen. In fact, by definition, it will, or Nvidia will own the entire universe at the rate they're growing, especially at the scale they're growing. But I think if you'd said to people 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there'll be multiple trillion-dollar market cap companies, nobody would have believed you. And here they are. So the economy continues to expand. This is an enormous growth, particularly for a company that's already been growing enormously. So that tells you that the demand for chips is enormous. But as we've been saying, the venture capital and broader capital investment has also been enormous. So what we can say so far, putting on my didactic hat, is we're very good at selling to venture capitalists and other private equity, and we're very good at buying chips. We'll see how large the ultimate economic gain is from this, and that will determine how far this goes and whether it will eventually plateau. And we're a long ways from being there yet.
Mm-hmm. The other
so
thing
I don't think it's going to slow down, but it's unclear where it's headed.
The other thing I would add is that it's very similar to, if we go back to the 90s and the explosion of the internet and Cisco, right? I mean, who could have thought that Cisco wouldn't be today, still like the company that does networking? I mean, they were empowered just like Nvidia at that very beginning, but then slowly, we started seeing other companies, right? Pop up, take away some market share, specialize in different areas. So I think Nvidia is kind of enjoying what Cisco enjoyed back in the 90s. And I think with time, we will see some competition and see some other players come in.
Yeah, I think where Nvidia, separates itself from a Cisco is its diversification, right? I mean, I think some of their other areas, obviously like software, et cetera, are smaller, but they are working on growing that and, their cloud business, et cetera. So they'll definitely get some competition in the chip world, but I think they seem to be doing a good job looking forward to that time and planning for it. Whereas Cisco, you can't say the same.
Similar. Well, Cisco tried. I mean, Microsoft was fairly successful. Remember, they were a PC software company 30 years ago. and now they're a cloud provider and a gaming company. So, they still have a lot of Office revenue, but really they have almost as much or maybe more now from Azure and from Xbox. So that is it. If you can do it, it's great.
Yeah. So I'm thinking we mark this as important, as just like, you just got to know this.
Yes. And if you didn't invest in them.
Yes. The message to the AI leader too is like, pressure's on, right? You need to deliver some kind of like results relatively soon, to kind of keep the fire burning. So we will we'll go important, and we will move on to the next one. We're doing good on time. Good job, everybody.
Okay, so the next one is a new kind of reasoning engine from the founders of Watson X, the IBM AI platform. And they are using a different approach to this problem solving or complex reasoning, which is not similar to LLMs.
Yes. So I forget, did I give this one to Adam? Yeah, I think it's you, Adam.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I rated this as important because the article itself actually contains a lot of interesting and useful, valuable information. It has a good executive summary, key findings, as you can see there, and I'll explain a little about what's going on. It touches a bit on what we talked about a couple days ago in terms of compound AI systems, right? So you're having these more advanced systems that aren't just a large language model. And in this case, what they're combining is large language models with what they describe as symbolic reasoning, which is really good at logical inference, deductive reasoning, and having really well-defined constraints and rules. So they found a process through which, by using both of them, they can get much higher, what did they say, accuracy, I guess, 100% accuracy across larger, more complex problems, as opposed to GPT-4 there, they say, falling off from 32 to 12% as the complexity increases. So conceptually, this is an important thing to understand, that there are limitations to LLMs, that there are systems being built that can get us many fewer hallucinations and much higher accuracy. This is also an article on Elemental Cognition's website. So I was a little on the fence about whether this would be optional because it's kind of PR. But overall, I think it's important to know that the LLMs alone are probably not going to be the solution to a lot of these use cases.
Yep, I would go with important. This is we talked about Google DeepMind's alpha geometry a while back, which was a similar process. So use the LLMs to brainstorm and to interpret and generate inputs and outputs, and then use what in the old days used to be called AI, symbolic reasoning systems, using logical deduction and things that have a model of the world. That's the key. So this is one of the big issues with LLMs is they don't have a model of the world. And that's why they quote unquote hallucinate or just have errors, because they're just statistically placing words together that they think will work. This is saying, okay, we actually do have a model of the world, and we're using the LLMs to translate the request into that model and reason against it. And that's why we are 100%. We always know what we're doing. We're transparent. We can tell you exactly how the reasoning works. It's an announcement. It's a product company's website. There's a lot to be skeptical of here, but this is the direction we've been talking about, that these multiple modalities, not just text and image, but statistical reasoning versus symbolic reasoning, let's say, combining those together may be very powerful.
Yeah, I would say we'll go with important on this one. And I also just want to give a kudos to the writer of this article, because of all the research that I've read recently, this was really well done. And I think it was accessible enough for any reader, which I thought was really cool. All right, we will go with important, and we will move to the next one.
Okay. Next one comes from China, where Moonshot AI, they have raised a valuation of $2.5 billion, with raising 1 billion funds for LLM focused on long context.
All right, more big money flying around. Tanya, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I wish I had some of that money, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, this article has a couple of things. I rate it important for a few reasons. One, I think it's interesting to see what we have experienced in the US with everyone running and investing in Anthropic and OpenAI. You know, we're starting to see that in China, right? This is a startup, not even a year old, has raised $1 billion. It's valued at $2.5 billion. And the companies that are investing are pretty well known, right? Alibaba and the Sequoia China branch. So some big players investing. I think it's definitely important to kind of stay aware of who's going to be that LLM developer, LLM vendor of choice out in China. And it sounds like they're doing very well. And then the other part that called my attention was, their LLM technology or their innovation, right? They're talking about using what they call long context, I guess, LLM. And they say in the article that they're using 100 billion parameters, I think is what I saw, and 200,000 Chinese characters that it supports. So it just seems like the whole way that they've taken the LLM is much more broader and much more impressive in a way, innovative. So because of all of that, I rank this as an important thing, and it's not too long.
Any other thoughts or disagreement?
Yeah, I'd call this optional. It's a money-raising announcement. It's in China. So for people who have significant interest in China, this is important. For the general AI leader, I'd say it's optional. It's interesting to read if you have time. We've been talking for a while about sovereignty and the idea that the bigger message, if there is one behind this, is that China is going to make sure they have these things. They're going to invest a lot of money in it, as most regional areas are already doing. And so this is just evidence of that, but it's an announcement of fundraising. They don't even have a product, I don't believe, on the market yet.
Who's supporting either Tanya or Tim to break the tie?
I think I support Tim on this one, that because it's an announcement, and again, the whole China thing, unless you're doing business there, I agree with that.
All right. Sorry, Tanya. I think
it's
you're
okay. I didn't realize that the product is not yet available in the market. So that makes sense to make it optional.
Okay. All right. We're all in agreement then. Optional. Next.
Okay, another one on the long LLM context window. So Microsoft has come out with long rope, which is extending the context length beyond 2 million tokens.
Tim, what do you think?
Really interesting, but optional unless you have a math degree. You're going to be twisted up in this pretty quickly because, at the end of the day, all these things are statistical engines of machine learning, and there's a lot of math under that. And so the summary is, it's really interesting because they've done some interesting new math, and that new math enabled them to go from what's the longest context window now? It's about 200K tokens or something to over 2 million tokens. So an order of magnitude increase in what's called the context window. And the reason that's important is if you think about a 200K window, that means you can read a part of a book and relate all the piece parts to each other. So you have enough context to get some portion of a book. This thing can read the whole book in one window and therefore relate all the parts of the book to each other. So it's definitely going to improve its context, literally, and it's definitely going to generate statistically better predictions of what kinds of words go together. The question is, at the end of the day, will this really impact errors, hallucinations, things like that? It will, and will it give better answers? And the answer is unclear. What is clear is that it doesn't degrade the performance of the system. So they can do this while maintaining the performance of these systems with much smaller context windows. So that's a very clever trick. And it should, because all of these things have shown larger context windows, larger numbers of parameters have generally made the models better. So this should make models better, but it's a research paper. It's heavily math oriented. So unless you're really into that stuff, and I would say optional.
All right. Unless anybody disagrees, I'm going to move us right to our last point here since we're down to our last 5 minutes. So we'll go with optional on that one, but interesting to keep track of the fact that context windows are potentially on the horizon to expand. So we couldn't close it out without talking about the talk of Twitter on, what was it, late Tuesday night? Twitter, X, I'm sorry. It's just really hard to let it go. ChatGPT apparently just went off the rails and was spitting out random stuff. Like it would start off answering a query correctly, and then it would just go off into some rant on that made no sense. So seemed important to talk about this, given, people have like applications in production with GPT-4, something to be aware of. And I would say that this is important for that, just as a reminder that these are not exactly stable yet. But love to hear from the rest of you guys.
I agree, and it happened to me, by the way. I actually ignored it. When the text came up, I was summarizing something, and I thought, weird, I wonder if I prompted it funny. And then I waited a little bit, and it was fine. I swear it was like Old English. I don't know what it was, and I didn't save it, and I'm like, whatever. But now it's like buried. But yeah, it was funny to say the least. But yeah, in production, that's bad. So I'd say if you didn't hear about this, I feel like it is important, actually.
Anybody else?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, look, even if you have the paid GPT Plus account access, you still get refused oftentimes, right? So I would agree, if you've got products in production based on the open API, then this is somewhat more important. It just reminds you again that the internet in general, remember, is not a reliable transport mechanism. Email is not guaranteed. We forget about these things because the infrastructure has become so reliable, but it's not guaranteed. And so for those in production or planning for production, this is something you really need to be aware of if it matters to your particular application. And for most people it will, but it's not that different from what's been going on, and it's the growing pains of a young market. So it's not that surprising.
And it's not the only vendor that this has happened, right? Gemini also had something last night, I think, that they had to apologize when people were doing searches for historical figures.
Oh, I hadn't heard about that one.
Yeah, I think it was on X.
So Gemini isn't giving detailed descriptions of white males or white people in the photographs, in historical photographs. Seems like it is focusing on sort of uh, other sort of races in terms of providing descriptions, but not providing details of white people specifically.
Interesting. All right, so we're going important on this. Any other thoughts to close it out? No. All right, we got through a lot today. Ankaj, I don't even know if were you able to keep up with the summary slide today?
Yes, just coming up in a second.
Did we have any essentials? I don't think we had any essentials, but it's several importance. Important around the chips, important around the ChatGPT episode, and then our research articles were all optional, I believe.
No, I gave it important to the one in there that I reviewed, I thought.
Okay.
You did the first one about EC, whatever. What was it? Something extended cognition or something? Yeah. The second one we said was elemental.
Well, we're coming up on 30 minutes, so we're going to get shut down. So if you want to see the summary, we have a newsletter where we send our summary of the rationale for our ratings. We give you the links, etc. So reach out to us if you want to be added to that newsletter. Otherwise, we will close out this session and we will see you tomorrow, everybody.